What is going on? I am the Ink Tutaku, and the next series that we are going to be talking about is not only one that, after watching and reading, is slowly becoming one of my new favorites, but it was also one of the longest running series to date, created in 1986 by a guy named Hirohiko Araki. We're talking JoJo's Bizarre Adventures, specifically Part 1, Phantom Blood, which introduces our first JoJo, in which, in my opinion, the most righteous and just JoJo there is, Jonathan Joestar and his adventures. I'm just going to go through a quick synopsis of Phantom Blood, just the events, like some key events that happen, because they don't really do anything different in the manga. You know, it's more that it's just censored and they just black out all the gore and stuff that happens in it. So we're just going to give a quick overview, and then we're going to get into the manga, like just to show you, because the art styles look not very different, but they're two different styles of when they made the anime and the manga. So I'm saying part 1, just have, Jonathan Joestar meets Dio Brando, which is his arch enemy. They become frenemy-ish. I don't even know what word I would use. Like, they're not friends. They weren't enemies, but like they just didn't like each other, but they just coexisted. And then once they're adults, they find out, JoJo finds out that Dio Brando's trying to poison his dad so he can get all his money. Then eventually, Dio gets a mask put on him, turns into a vampire. JoJo meets Zeppeli, a guy named Zeppeli, which teaches him Ripple. It's called Haman in the anime, but calls it Ripple. And then they go and fight Dio, ends up chopping his own head off, and then they defeat Dio, if you will. Then Dio gets put in a casket and they go on a boat. JoJo gets with Arena, which he marries, and then they try to sail to America. That's when they find out that Dio's on the ship, and Dio kills JoJo. Arena's pregnant, but before JoJo dies, he's clutching Dio's head, and he tells Arena to get out of there with this baby, not their baby because she's pregnant, but another baby, and she flees to America. So that's pretty much that's just like the key notes of what happens in that. But we can get into the manga. Like I said, there's not differences. It's just gory in comparison, and they just have the gore. So, like here, when Dio's dad finds George Joestar at the beginning, the dude got impaled in the face. So, and when he tries to steal his ring. And here when Dio, like a piece of shit, Dio's probably one of the most piece of shit characters, like evil characters, I think, in anime or manga, to be honest. He takes JoJo's dog Danny and throws him in their incinerator, and they just black that whole thing out. So you don't see it, but you can see here how they drew it, and he burned him to a crisp and killed him. And here's just a picture of JoJo and Dio, what they look like in the manga. So it's like they don't look different, but they look like more cut and chiseled in the anime. But that's really it, just like their facial features look a little bit different. And then here when he's like fucking with the mask, and he has those two drunkards and he puts the mask on that guy, he cuts his hand, they just black that out and just not show it. And then after Dio gets turned into a vampire, when he goes and fights JoJo the first time, and he pops that dude's head off. And then here when they're fighting still, and stabs him through the hand, just more like, I don't know why they black it out. Like, they don't, I'm not 100% sure, but I think once they get to part 5, there's no more blacking stuff out, if I'm not mistaken, because I don't think there was. But here is Zeppeli, and it's like he just looks very different than, like I said, he looks more chiseled. Like, all their facial features just look very more chiseled in the anime. And this is after JoJo fights Jack the Ripper, and he melts his face off. That you can, and Jack the Ripper, like, he looks a little more slim in the anime, but. And then you see when Zeppeli's fighting, when they fight Dio Brando, I guess you could say the second time, when Dio chums and tries to kill them, and he tries to use his Haman, or his Ripple, to ripple into Dio. He ends up somehow like reversing it back into Zeppeli shredding his arm up. And this is when JoJo fights Tarkus after Zeppeli couldn't beat him. And he just chops his arm in half. And then see here when Dio gets cut in half. I don't know why they would black all this out, but that's, JoJo cuts him in half with a sword but doesn't kill him. And then you see here, they blacked out him chopping off his own head, And then the last one, because I don't have any after this, is when they're on the ship and these drunk dudes are like going to see what this fancy, because it's super fancy looking chest, and dude gets his head blown off. But that's it for JoJo's Part 1. I hope people check out JoJo's. Like I said, it's becoming one of my favorite series. I think it's so over the top. It's freaking hilarious. And then once you get to Stands, my one gripe is I wish that they would have kept Ripple in, but we'll get to that later. But once you get to Stands, it gets even better. But that's Part 1. We're going to do Part 2, Battle Tendencies, next. Otaku out.